Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm glad that you're watching. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you different US visa interview questions that you're likely to be asked, especially if you indicate in your DS-160 form, that is your US visa B1, B2 visa application form, if you indicate that you either have relatives in the US, or that you're going to be staying with relatives in the US, or that any of your relatives will be sponsoring a trip. So basically, your relative could either be your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter, your son-in-law, daughter-in-law. It could be your brother, it could be your auntie, it could be your grandma, it could be whoever that person you're related with, either by blood or by marriage. And this question came up a lot after I had shot my other video on 50 plus frequently asked US B1, B2 visa interview questions. So several of you asked either in the comment section or sent me private DMs, and others asked on my blog on how to answer or what specific questions you're likely to be asked, especially if you're going to visit a relative, or if you indicate that you have a relative in the US. So I'm going to briefly run down through some of those questions. Again, these are based on either my experience or the experience of my readers, the readers on my blog, or people who watch me on YouTube who are kind enough to share with me questions from their experience or the experience of their other friends or relatives who had been to the US Embassy under such similar circumstances. So again, if you're in doubt or if you have any more questions, feel free to ask me, or you can simply even just visit the US Embassy visa website of your country, wherever you are located, and I'm sure you'll get further information. So I'm just going to give some of those questions and just tell you an example of what answer you can give to a particular question. So question number one, usually just a little background. So personally, I think I have been to the US Embassy maybe 6 times or 7, and mostly is because until about 3 or 4 years ago, Kenyan passport holders could not be given a US visa of more than 1 year at a time. So the maximum you could get is, especially if you're going for B1, B2, the maximum period of time you could get was 1 year, multiple entry. So for somebody like me who was, I have this on my bucket list to visit all the 50, is it 2 or 1 United States. So I was a very frequent traveler to the US, and so over time I would hear questions people were asked, or some of these questions would even be asked to me. So based on that background, and every single time that I went to the embassy, the first question that I would be asked, irrespective of whether I was going for a business trip or I was going for my own personal leisure trip, is, why do you want to go to America? Like, that was a standard question I would be asked. And this is a very simple question. You simply answer why you're going. So for example, I'm attending the general conference session of 2020, or I am attending the management accountants conference, or I'm going to attend my daughter's wedding, or my sister's graduation, or my grandchild's circumcision ceremony, or the customary cutting of my granddaughter's hair, first hair, whatever reason it is that is taking you to America. Just pick one of the main reasons and tell the visa office a very short and precise question. The other question that you're likely to be asked is this going to be your first trip to America? So again, it depends. If you have been to America before, you can say, I have been there several times before, and this is likely going to, or if you have never been, you can just say, no, if I'm granted a visa, sorry, have you ever been to the Is this going to be your first trip to the US? If you have never been, just say yes, granted a visa, this is going to be my first trip to the US. If you have traveled there before, you can say no, madam, or no, sir, or whoever is interviewing you. And then if you are, again, I have said, when you fill out your DS 160 form, that is the US visa application form, one of the questions you'll have to answer is whether you have any relatives in the US. And more often than not, if you said yes to that question, you're going to meet it again at the interview. So you're likely to be asked, do you have any relatives in the United States? Again, if you have relatives, you will say yes. If you don't have, you will say no. And the likely follow-up question to this, if you say yes, is who is your relative? So again, remember, and this I always tell people, whatever you write in your DS 160 form, make sure you're as truthful and as honest as possible. Because when you say the truth, you hardly have to remember what you wrote in there. And secondly, I always advise people to take an extra copy of the DS 160 form. Remember, there's one that you hand into the visa officer, but make sure that you keep a copy for yourself and carry it to the interview so that you're very familiar with what you have written on your DS 160 form. And especially in cases where you asked somebody else to fill out the form on your behalf, make sure that you go through what they have written, because most of the questions they ask you, they already asked you at the DS 160 form, and they're just trying to corroborate. And just the fact that this information between your DS 160 form and the one that you're giving the visa officer is conflicting could very easily just jeopardize your application. So again, if you say yes, I have relatives in the US, just make sure that whoever you mention is the same person that you had put in your DS 160 form. So you can say, I have a brother, I have a daughter, I have a cousin, I have a grandmother, I have a mom, I have a dad, whoever it is that is in the US. And then usually if you have said whoever it is, the next question you're likely to be asked is, when did, I don't know, let's call my relative Beyonce. So when did Beyonce come to the United States? Again, it's a very simple question. So you either know when Beyonce came to the US or you don't know. So if you don't know when your sister Beyonce came to the US, just say, I don't know, I'm sorry. If you know when they came, you can say they first came to the US in 1965. Or if you're not very sure, you can just say, I don't remember the exact dates, but it's about, I don't know, 2 years ago, or it was sometimes in 2015, but I don't remember the exact date, okay? The next question that you're likely to be asked when you have already given that information, you'll be asked on what visa did your sister Beyonce come on to the US. Again, this is a question that you either have an answer to or you don't, and it's okay. Yeah, so if you don't have an answer, just simply say, I'm sorry, I do not know on what visa my sister Beyonce traveled with to the United States. If you know what visa they traveled on, say for example they traveled on a green card, so you'll just say, my sister Beyonce first traveled to the US on a green card. Or if you really don't know, you just know that your sister went to the US maybe to study, you can just say, I'm not sure on what visa they went on, but I know they left Kenya to the US to go and study. So just try to be truthful as possible, and wherever you're in doubt, it's okay. Just tell the visa officer, I'm sorry, I'm not sure, or I don't know. But again, that's why I'm giving you this question. So if at the time you go to the embassy, you can ask your relatives what answers to these questions are. The next question that you're likely to be asked is so you already said that you have a sister Beyonce, so excuse me. What does your sister Beyonce do for a living in the United States? Again, if you don't know what your sister Beyonce does for a living, just say, I'm sorry, I don't. If you know what they do, again, answer the question. So you can say, Beyonce is a doctor, or Beyonce is a software engineer, Beyonce is musician, Beyonce is a travel blogger. Whatever she does for a living, just mention it. Or if she doesn't work, maybe you can say she's a stay-at-home mom, or he's a stay-at-home dad, or he is retired, sorry, she is retired, or whatever it is, just mention what they do for a living. And then the other question that you're likely to be asked is, if they asked, for example, what do they do for a living, and you mention that they actually have something that they do for a living, the next question you're likely to be asked is, where do they work? So if, let's say, Beyonce is a software engineer at Google, you'll just say she works at Google. And if you know the place, you can say Google San Francisco. Or if your son is what's another nice job? Oh, if your son Jay-Z is a musician, so you can say he's a musician based in the Bronx. And yeah, so just answer accordingly. And again, when you're not sure, just say I'm sorry, I'm not sure, or I don't know. The next question you're likely to be asked is, so you had said that you have a son, you have a brother, you have a sister in the US, they have something they do for a living, they work in company ABC. So the next question you're likely to be asked is, how much is the salary? I know it sounds creepy, but they actually do ask how much is the salary. So again, this is information that you either have or you don't have. And if you don't have, again, just say, I'm sorry, I don't know. If you know, say, I don't know, they earn 10,000 US dollars, so just make sure you have documented evidence to prove that fact. So if, let's say, it was your sister Beyonce, you know how much their salary is, you should either have a pay slip or I don't know, their bank statement that reflects the same information. Sorry. The next question that you're likely to be asked is, the relative that you mentioned you have, did they study in America, or do they study in America? So if they currently study in America, so just say yes, they currently study in America. Or if they already finished, you can say yes, they studied in America. So again, if you say yes, they study in America, or they studied in America, the next obvious follow-up question is, where did they go to school? So again, just mention they went to Texas, I don't know, University, or they went to the University of Chicago, or they go to Harvard Business School, or they go to Penn State, or whatever university or college they're at, just mention it. And another next obvious question, when you mention the university, you're going to be asked, what are they studying, or what did they study? So if you know what they study, just say, I don't know, they studied engineering, they studied music theory, or they studied art, or they studied cinematography, or they studied whatever it is that they studied, just mention it. And if you don't know, say, I'm sorry, I don't. And if you're feeling like flossing, so let's say your daughter or your sister Beyonce studied nuclear physics at PhD level, you can as well go for some bragging rights and just say they're studying for their PhD in nuclear physics, or they're doing their postdoctorate in aeronautical engineering. Yeah, so you can just slide it in there. Yeah, okay. And then again, you're likely to be asked, who is paying for Beyonce's studies, or who paid for her studies? Again, if Beyonce was self-sponsored, you can say Beyonce is self-sponsored, or our son, or our daughter, our brother, sister, my cousin, my grandmother was self-sponsored, she was paying for her own school fees. Or if the parents were paying for her, you can say my parents were paying for her. Or if you are the parent, you can say I was paying for her school fees, or I'm the one who pays for her school fees. Or if, I don't know, they are on a scholarship, you can just say that they won a scholarship, and the school is paying for it. Or if it's I don't know what scholarship, Schengen, whatever scholarships those are you get, you can just mention that they won a fully paid for scholarship. So whatever it is, just answer. And then the other question you're likely to be asked is, how long has your relative been in the US for? So again, that is almost a question similar to when was the first time they entered the US. So if you know the first time they entered the US, just calculate minus the year you're at, And if you're not very sure, just say I don't remember. Or if it's, so I know, for example, I have a relative who went to the US the day before Obama was sworn in as a president. So I don't remember the exact date. So when they ask me this question, I usually just say I don't remember the exact date, but I remember it was the day before Obama was first sworn in as the United States president. So if you have an event that you can reference to, because you don't have the exact dates, go ahead. If you're not sure, just say I'm sorry, I'm not sure, or I don't know. The next question that you're likely to be asked is your relative married? So if you had said you have a son, a daughter, brother, sister, cousin, grandmother, whoever, mother, father, you're likely to be asked if they're married. Again, it's a very simple question. They're either married or they're not. So answer accordingly. Yes, they're married, or no, they are not, or I don't know. If you don't know, it gets even tricky, because things like marriage are very, as much as they're very personal, they are things that, like if someone is in a genuine relationship, they will be happy to let their friends and their relatives know about it. And especially in a situation whereby, let's say you had said you are going to stay with this person, or they were sponsoring your trip, it's a little creepy if you say that you don't know their marital status. So my advice, if you don't know genuinely, ask before your visa interview question, so that you have the correct information. And if you say yes, they are married, the next question you're likely to be asked is, where does their spouse stay? So, or they will ask you like, does their spouse also stay in America? So again, answer accordingly, yes or no. Another question they're likely to ask you is, do they have any kids? So do they have any children? Again, yes or no, they don't. If you say yes, you're likely to be asked how many. So answer accordingly. They have 3 kids, or they have 4 kids, or I don't know, whatever it is, just answer. And we even know of a case where somebody was asked, is your daughter pregnant? So again, they could ask you if your relative, maybe your auntie, your sister, whoever it is you're visiting, if they're pregnant. So just ask around so that you can have that information. And if you don't know, it's okay, just say I don't know. The other question you're likely to be asked, if you had said like the relative or whoever it is married, they're likely to ask you where does the spouse work. So again, make sure you have all that information, and or what do they do for a living, make sure you have all that information as well. The other question you're likely to be asked, again, this is not so dependent on the fact that you indicated having a relative in the US, but you could be asked who is paying for your trip. So again, this is information that you had already answered in your DS-160 form. Consistency is key. Who is paying for your trip? So there are only 2 people who could pay for your trip, yourself or somebody else. So if it's yourself, you can say I'm paying for it myself. Or if somebody else is paying for the trip, you can say I don't know, that relative or whoever is paying for the trip. And make sure that you can justify why that person is paying for your trip. So for example, let's say you had indicated attending my sister's wedding. So, and then they ask you, so who's sponsoring your trip? And you say, my sister will be paying for it. And again, one question, sorry, that I forgot. So you're likely to be asked, how many siblings do you have? So you'd say maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4, maybe, 2 sisters and 3 brothers. And then one question you're likely to be asked, are you the only one traveling for this graduation or for this wedding? And let's say you say yes or no or whatever, and then they ask you who's sponsoring your trip, and you say my sister, my brother, whoever, auntie, mom is sponsoring my trip. So the next question you're likely to be asked is, why are you the one who is going for this trip and not your other 5 siblings? Or why are you the one whom your sister or your brother is paying for this trip and not other people? So just make sure you have a genuine reason why your sister picked you to attend her wedding and to pay for it amongst your other 5 siblings. So you can, for example, explain that my other siblings are, maybe they are probably or currently in school, so they will not be able to attend, or my other siblings are already in the US, I'm the only one who's in Kenya, so that's why they decided for me to attend this wedding. Or I don't know, if let's say it's your parents, you are parents to your relative who's getting married or wedding or graduation, you can just mention that this graduation is very important to us. We have worked so hard to take our child to school, and this was their way of giving back to us. I don't know, you can answer whatever it is. And then the next question you're likely to be asked is, what do you do for a living? So you're either working, not working, or you're retired. So if you work, you can say I'm a professor at the university, or I'm a travel blogger, or I own a jewelry business, or I'm an aeronautical engineer, or I'm a pilot, or I'm a stay-at-home mom, or I'm a stay-at-home dad, or I don't have a job, or I'm retired. So whatever your circumstance is, just answer accordingly. And the next question you're likely to be asked is, so you are an aeronautical engineer, where do you work? So you can say I'm an aeronautical engineer with Kenya Airways, the pride of Africa. Or I run my own business, or I'm retired. So if, let's say, you said I work for whoever you work for, they'll ask you, so what happens to your job during this period when you're going to be away? So again, answer accordingly. So for example, that's where your employer's letter comes in. You can say I am going to be on annual leave during this time, and we, together with my employer, have made adequate arrangements for someone to sit in for me. Within the 3 weeks I'll be away, and then I'll come back to my job. So make sure you have a letter that clearly indicates this information. If you're retired, you can mention I just retired, like, I don't know, 2 years ago, so I have extra time on my hands to attend my daughter's wedding or my son's graduation, or to go and cut my grandchildren's hair as is customary. So whatever reason that is, just mention it. Another question that you're likely to be asked is, how much is your salary? So if, let's say, you already mentioned you work at Google, you can say my salary is, I don't know, 10,000 US a month. Make sure you have documentary evidence to prove those facts. If you're retired, they could ask you, are you on a pension? If yes, they'll ask you how much is your pension, or how much was given to you. If you're still processing this information, you can just mention, I just retired 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, and I'm waiting for the government to finalize the pension preparation. So whatever your circumstance, if you're a business person, you can say, I run a jewelry business and my monthly net income is 6,000 US dollars a month. So whatever information that you give, just make sure you have documented evidence to support it, and make sure that it matches all the information you had entered in your DS-160 visa application form. The next question you're likely to be asked is, when do you intend to travel for the wedding or the graduation or whatever for this trip? So make sure that you have all this information handy and that it matches the information you have put in your DS-160 form. So you can say the graduation is on the 15th of April, so I plan to arrive on 10th, just to clear, or the wedding is on the 15th, I plan to arrive on the 13th. So just answer accordingly. And then the next question you're likely to be asked, why have you chosen to travel at this time? So let's say if I was going for vacation, I choose to travel in December. So you can say, for example, I have never seen snow since I was born, and this would be an opportunity for me not only to see my brother or my sister, or I don't know, to visit the US and to see snow for the first time in my life. Or I noticed that the ticket prices were slightly on the lower side during December, and that was the appropriate time for me to visit. Or I have been to the US In the fall, I have been to the US. In spring, I have been to the US. In summer, but I've never been to the US in winter. So I just want to go and experience that side of the US. Or you can mention that the cherry festival has always been on my bucket list for the longest time, and it's just during this period that my chances of seeing the cherries bloom are the highest. So that's why I want to travel this period, during this period. Or the general conference happens once in every 5 years, and in the last time it happened 5 years ago, I was able to attend for work reasons, or because I didn't have sufficient income, but I have now in a position where I'm financially capable of attending that event and having a good time. So just answer accordingly. The next question you're likely to be asked is so where are you married? So if you're married, you will say yes. If you're not married, you will say no. If you're widowed, just answer accordingly. I'm widowed. So if, let's say, you answer that yes, I am married, so the next question they are likely to ask you is your spouse traveling with you, or is your spouse accompanying you on this trip? Again, yes or no. So if you say yes, if you say no, the most likely question you will be asked is, why is it your spouse accompanying you on this trip? So there are various ways to answer this. Again, just make sure that you're as truthful as possible. So for example, you can say, the last time, so for example, you can say, during this period when I will be attending going for vacation or whatever, my husband is busy with work, or my wife will be busy with work, or she could not get leave from work because of work demands, so that's why I'm going to be traveling alone. Or you can say, 2 years ago, our daughter sponsored my wife for the trip, and she visited them, and this time it just felt good to sponsor me for my trip. Or you can say, we run a business back home, and that requires the presence of either one of us. So my husband is choosing to stay behind to take care of business, or my wife is choosing to stay behind to take care of business. So just answer according to your circumstance or your situation. The next question that you're likely to be asked is, do you have any children? So again, you either have children or you don't. So if you have children, say yes. If you don't have children, say no. So if you say yes, I have children, you're likely to be asked how many. So you'll say there are, 4 or 5. And then they're also likely to ask you, how old are the children? Then say what age they are. And the other question they're likely to ask you is, where are your children? So once you have answered all that, the next question they're likely to ask, especially if the children are a little younger, is, when you travel to the US, who is going to be taking care of the children? So again, you can say my spouse, or I have made arrangements with my sister, my brother, whoever. Just answer accordingly. Which reminds me, so the other question that you're likely to be asked about your relative is, so let's say you had said they are married, you're likely to be asked, when is their wedding anniversary? Yes, they ask that. So make sure you know if they got married, when they got married. Or they'll ask you, so they'll know, they may ask you directly, like, when did they get married, or when was their wedding, or whatever. So just ask your relative when their wedding was, and then you answer it accordingly. Another question you're likely to be asked is, which places do you intend to visit when you go to the US? So again, this is where your itinerary comes handy. I am always for the idea that make sure you have your itinerary planned out. So if you're going to be the US like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, how long? Just make sure you arrange your time and print it out in a nice Word document and carry it with you to the embassy, so that if they ask you, so you can say, for the first 3 days I'm going to be in Chicago, the next 4 days I'm going to Vegas, the next 6 days I'm flying to Arizona, whatever. So just make sure you have like a clear plan of how you intend to spend your time. They may ask you, they may not ask you. And they're also likely to ask you, how much do you intend to spend on this trip? So again, that's where your itinerary will come up. So as you have your itinerary lined up, so just try to allocate some costs for every item you intend to spend on, whether it's accommodation, food, transport, tickets for different attractions, whatever it is. Just make sure that in your itinerary you spell out what you're likely to be your expenditure items, and then cost them accordingly, and then add up so that you have like a sample figure. So you can say it will cost me roughly, I don't know, 5,000 US dollars. And then the next question you're likely to be asked, have you already bought your air tickets? So if you have bought your air tickets, say yes. If you haven't, say no. So if, let's say, you say no, they're likely to ask you why. So you can say, I just thought it would be a wiser decision to buy the tickets at the time when I have surety that I have a visa. Okay, if you've already booked them and they ask you why you booked them before getting a visa, you can say that I noticed that the ticket prices were very volatile and I got a really good deal, so I thought it was nice to just get it at that time. Or you can say my ticket has a cancellation, a free cancellation option, or a minimal fee cancellation option, so just in case I don't get the visa, I have that option to cancel the ticket. So just answer accordingly. Another question you're likely to be asked, have you ever been, so let's say you're from Kenya, they'll ask you, have you ever traveled outside Kenya before? Again, this is a question that most people struggle with. So if you haven't been outside your country, just say, no, I haven't. If you have been outside the country, just say, yes, I have. And the interesting thing about this question is, let's say I indicated that I am going to the US for vacation or for tourism. And then, incidentally, I have never gone outside the borders of Kenya. It's a little bit iffy that I have never even gone to Arusha or to Kampala or Entebbe or Kigali or just even within the continent. But somehow, all of a sudden, I am inspired to go and tour the US. If I was the visa officer, okay, I'm not one. So if, let's say, you're Kenyan and you're answering this question, if you have traveled outside the US, say yes. And most probably, if you're watching this video, you're going to be going to the US with your new Kenyan passport. If you have traveled, if you traveled outside Kenya before you got your new passport, just make sure that you carry it along with you, because sometimes they might want evidence. As much as they have in this information, they might just want that evidence. So make sure that you carry your old passport with you, or the passport which has the stamps of those other countries. But if you haven't traveled, if I was you, I would, and I'm going for tourism to the US, I would at least try to go outside my country. Even just somewhere, there's so many places that Kenyans can visit visa-free. There are several countries, I think there's like 34 countries that Kenyans can travel to visa-free. There's even tons more that you can travel to with a visa on arrival. So if I was in your shoes and my answer to this question is no, I would at least try and go somewhere, especially if I'm traveling for tourism purposes. It just adds more weight to your interview and to your application that you have quote unquote exhausted regional travel, or travel that, let's say, doesn't require a visa, and therefore it makes sense for me to want to go further along across the oceans. The next question you're likely to be asked is, how long do you intend to stay in the US? So again, this is information that you had already answered in your DS-160 form, which I assume you answered as honestly and as truthfully as possible. So that's basically the same information you'll be giving on here. So I intend to stay for 2 weeks. I intend to stay for 3 weeks. And wherever amount of time you intend to stay for, just make sure that it's reasonable comparative to your reason of visit. So let's say, for example, I was going for my sister's graduation, and then they asked me, how long do you intend to stay in the US for? And my answer is 6 months. You know, it's a little suspicious, especially when you claim to have a job. I'm not sure about you, but I am yet to stumble upon a job in Kenya, for example, where they will give you 6 months annual leave. Yeah, or even if you hold a business, being away for 6 months sounds a little tricky. So again, my point is, try to be as reasonable with your answer or with your intended dates of stay if you're genuinely going to the US for non-immigrant purposes. Just make sure that even your answers match your intentions. So let's say you have mentioned going to the US and I'll be staying for 3 months. The next question, so let's if you mention a significantly longer amount of time, or sometimes, and if you just mention even 2 weeks, the next question you're likely to be asked is why can't you shorten your the length of your visit? Again, you can answer that accordingly. So for example, you can say, so let's say you're going for your sister Beyonce's wedding. So you can mention that the wedding is going to take place in, I don't know, Florida, for example, and I have never been. So I intend to visit the surrounding locations for maybe 3 more days after the wedding. And that's why I'm going to be staying for a week. Or let's say if you had mentioned that your purpose of your trip was for tourism, so you can say, from what I gather, the US is a pretty big country with tons of things to see. So I think 2 weeks will be sufficient time for me to see the highlights that I have on my bucket list or on my itinerary. Or you can say that let's say like 1 month is going to be sufficient time for us to not only attend our, I don't know, sister's graduation or my son's wedding, but also get to bond with our other relatives who will have traveled for the graduation, sorry, for the wedding, or who also reside in the US, or wherever your reason is. Just make sure it's something that is reasonable. You can also mention that, to be honest, 2 weeks sounded like a reasonable time to tour the East Coast. However, I'm open for a visa for a shorter time if, you know, that sounds more reasonable. I've never been to the US, so I was just planning my trip based on the information that I have. But so just give your reasons accordingly, and that's why I say put enough thought in your application form as you apply for your visa. Put enough thought to how you answer your questions, to your reasons for visiting, to how long you want to stay. When you genuinely have non-immigrant intentions, this shouldn't be really hard. Okay, the next question you're likely to be asked is by the visa officer is, what guarantee can you give me, or what guarantee do I have that at the end, so let me rephrase that. So if I give you a visa today, what guarantee do I have that you will indeed come back to Kenya or to your home country at the end of your visit? Again, this is where family ties, social ties, economic ties, I have shot an entire video on that. You can check it out. This is where now they come handy. Okay, so for example, you can say, I have a 3-year-old child that I'm leaving behind, that I'm not traveling with, and she means the world to me. There's no way I would walk away from that. Or I have a decent job that I love so much, and I like what I do, and I just can't imagine not coming back to that. Or you can say, I have property in Nairobi, in Kenya, in wherever, India, Mombasa, wherever your home is. I have invested in a lot of property back home that I have to come back to. And let's say if you have mentioned you have property make sure you have documented evidence to prove ownership. So if you have a car, you'd have like a logbook. If you have an apartment, you could have your leasehold document. If you have like a townhouse, you could have the title deed. If you have a piece of land, so just make sure that whatever it is, you have sufficient documented evidence to support your claims. You can also mention that my mom just retired and she's depending on me to take care of her and visit her so often, just to check on her. So just mention any of those ties that you have. Another question you're likely to be asked is, when was the last time the relative you mentioned came back home? So let's say your sister Beyonce has been in America for I don't know how long. So they will ask you, like, when was the last time Beyonce came back to Kenya? So again, answer accordingly. You can say, for example, it's been 3 weeks since she was last year. She was here in early January, or since she went, she's never come back, or I don't know. But again, just find out from, because it's very interesting if, let's say, you say, I'm going for Beyonce's wedding and you don't even know the last time she was here. Yeah. Another question you're likely to be asked is, when did you last see Beyonce? So again, you can answer according. So there are only other ways you could have seen them. Either they traveled back to Kenya or to your home country, or you traveled to the US and you saw them, or I don't know, you guys went for a girls trip to Paris and you met there. So just answer accordingly. We last met 2 weeks ago, and they're likely to ask you where. So just answer, we met in Jamaica, or we met back in the US, or we met when she came to Kenya. Okay. And then another question likely to be asked is, so let's say you've mentioned that she last came to Kenya 2 years ago. They're likely to ask you, so when is the next time Beyonce is coming back to Kenya? So again, answer accordingly. If you know, you can say yes. If you know, you can say she's likely to come back, I don't know, next year, because she's been coming back home every year for Christmas. Or you can say the last time we spoke, she said she would come back in 2019 to celebrate with us Dad's 70th birthday. Or you can say that I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I don't know. Just answer accordingly. Let me see. Yeah. Another question that you're likely to be asked is, do you plan to work while in the US? So again, this is not like a trick question, but remember, you're applying for a B1, B2 non-immigrant visa. Basically, this visa is purely for business, travel, or for leisure. And that means you're not allowed to engage in any form of gainful employment. So your answer to this question should be no, and not just your answer. This visa does not allow you to work, so technically you're not supposed to be working. So you just answer no, I do not. Okay. And sometimes they can ask you why, so just explain that I understand that this visa does not authorize me to engage in gainful labor. So yeah, and I'm traveling to the US purely for vacation purposes, and that's why I'm going to be there. Or I'm traveling to the US for my daughter's wedding or my sister's wedding, and that's my sole purpose for visiting. Or I'm traveling to the US for this conference, and that's my main reason for being there, and I intend to come back home at the end of the conference. So just answer accordingly. If you had mentioned that you have property in Kenya, you're likely to be asked, who is going to take care of your property while you are away? So again, just answer accordingly. You can say, I have a team of 3 able staff who have been always, that I've worked with for the last 3 years, and I trust them to run the business in my absence. Or you can mention that my spouse will be remaining behind to watch over the business. Or you can say, in this day and age of technology, I have put sufficient mechanisms in place to enable me to monitor the business remotely, alongside my very able staff that will be engaged in the day-to-day operation of the business. Okay. Another question likely to be asked is, if let's say you had mentioned you have a sister or a brother or a daughter or a son. In the US, they're likely to ask you, when is your relative's birth date? Okay, so make sure you have this information. So if they were born in January 1, 1980, answer accordingly. Or they could ask you, how old is your son, or how old is your sister? So sometimes, so personally for me, for example, it's easier for me to remember when people were born, like their birth dates, than their age. So you can just say, I know they were born in 1976, so they should be, and then you try and do the quick math. Yeah, so don't kill yourself if you don't have the exact age, but make sure you know at least the birth date, because using the birth date you can calculate even right there on the spot. Not all of us were good in math. So another question you're likely to be asked, if let's say your relative is the one who had invited you to the US, you're likely to be asked, so let's say you had said it was a wedding, they could ask you, can you please show me the wedding invitation card? Or if it was a graduation, they could ask you, can you please show me the graduation invite? So, or if it was for vacation and you're going to stay with them, they could ask you, can you just show me the letter of invite? So again, make sure you have the documented evidence to show all this information. Okay, yeah, that was a pretty long video, but I hope it was helpful for you. So those are some of the questions that you're likely to be asked, especially if you indicate that you have a relative in the US, or your trip is sponsored by a relative in the US, or you intend to visit your relatives who are in the US. Thank you very much for staying up to the end of this video. I know it was pretty long, but I was just trying to be as comprehensive as possible. And thank you also for letting me know what you think. If you liked the video, remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, obviously subscribe, so that you will be the first one to know every time I shoot out similar videos. And if you've already subscribed, remember to hit the notification bell. Again, I've said that. And if you have further questions, you have other video types you'd like me to cover in the next videos, please remember to leave a comment at the bottom and let me know what you think. And if this video helps you with your interview process, remember to just come back here and share with somebody else. You never know, you could help somebody out here. So that's it for today. Thank you for staying. See you in the next video. Bye bye.